nobody's going to become a millionaire off of this, but we will all be happy and satisfied in our work, and we will all be able to sustain the creativity that we want to see in the world.
This is Podcast Perspectives, a show about the podcast industry and the people behind it. I'm your host, Jeff Umbro, founder and CEO of the Podglomerate. Today on the show, I'm speaking with Bikram Chatterji, CEO of MaxFun. MaxFun is a podcast network founded in 2004 by the husband and wife team, Jesse and Teresa Thorn. MaxFun has always been a force in the podcast industry, but what really launched it into the public eye was an announcement made in March of 2023, where Jesse announced that he would be stepping down as CEO and converting the company to a co-op model. What this means is that the company would officially be owned by the employees of the company, and they would have a vote on the bigger questions of the direction of that company. We discuss a lot of the mechanics of how this works with Bikram, but if anybody is really interested in diving in further, I do encourage you to check out the show notes of today's episode, where we link to a bunch of articles and interviews about the topic. Bikram has led the transition to this new model as MaxFun's current CEO. On the show today, we discuss why the co-op was formed, the major challenges in the first year, the benefits, especially to team morale, and the future. What can go right and what can go wrong. So here's my conversation with Bikram. So Bikram, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I think a lot of people listening to the show are going to know the answer to this, but just to make sure that we cover it, can you walk me through what MaxFun is, and then we'll get into some of the more recent developments later on.
Yeah, MaxFun is a pioneering podcast network. We produce our own shows, and we distribute for partner shows that are all independently produced and owned. Right now, we have about 35 shows on the network. 10 of those are produced in-house and either owned or in partnership with their creators, and the balance are produced independently, and they just work with us on distribution, marketing, audience, and monetization.
And MaxFun started in 2004. I was founded by Jesse Thorn. How long have you been with MaxFun?
I've been with the company since 2016. I joined as sort of the company's first, at that time, managing director, basically the person who would take over day-to-day management of the business aspect of the company from Jesse and Teresa, who were running it at the time.
And in terms of the scale of the company, from when you joined, how many downloads were you seeing versus today? What kind of revenue were you seeing versus today?
To be perfectly candid in terms of downloads, what a download means has changed so dramatically since 2016 and the various iterations of the IAB. So even if I knew what the download levels were in 2016, I don't know that they would be like-for-like comparable. In terms of revenue, there was a sharp period of accelerated growth, and some of that was due to just growth in our membership program, and a lot of it was due to bringing advertising in-house in 2020, but that has sort of leveled off. So I don't know what the overall figure is. I think it's probably around 200-300% in terms of revenue growth. But again, that's over a long time period, and it was definitely managing through that growth, and now managing through the next phase is what I've sort of been focused on.
So why would somebody come to MaxFun as opposed to a SiriusXM or a Spotify or something?
Yeah, it's a thing I think about a lot because I love our team. I think they're so fantastic. And I think this is maybe the appropriate time to talk about transitioning to a worker cooperative, if that makes sense, because I feel like that's a huge part of what MaxFun's value proposition to potential employees is now. In 2023, in June, we converted to be a worker-owned cooperative. So as you mentioned, we were sort of founded in 2004. We were incorporated in 2011. And during that time period, Jesse and Teresa were the owners of the company. We operated by a specific set of values. We operated for long-term growth and long-term success of the company and the shows that were on the company. And then last year we converted to be a cooperative. And for workers or potential workers, I think that really means that they understand the company really cares about their interests, that they will have a seat at the table when major decisions are being made. If the company does well, they will share in that success. Everybody here fundamentally cares about the work product that we make, the shows that we create, And I think having that deep connection to both the company and to the work that we're putting out in the world makes a difference. I can't speak to the motivations for folks going to other places, but for me, it really it makes me proud to be working here every day. And I feel like that's a sort of a shared attitude amongst the folks who work here.
And so it's been, I don't know, 8 months maybe since this has become official. I know you announced it a few months prior to that. Has there been any significant changes in the day-to-day of the business? I know that the corporate structure has changed. Is there any shift in anybody's specific role?
Not in the day-to-day operations of the business, is sort of like how we develop shows, how we produce the shows that exist. And I think that's really intentional, right? Partly there's two things. One, whenever a company goes through a major transition, one of the things you want to do is, if things are going well, which they were, is to make sure you keep things going well, is to make sure that you don't create a huge disruption. And the other thing is the conversion to a co-op was really continuous with our business strategy and with the way we conducted business beforehand. So there wasn't a fundamental driver of change. There wasn't a sense that we need to do this because we need to respond to the marketplace. We need to do this because, some existential threat is facing us. We did want to do it, but it wasn't against a backdrop of other things that were forcing us into the change. It was a change by choice. The things that have changed, there is a new board of directors, and that board of directors is worker owners. They're people I work with. I was on that board for the first 6 months of the co-op's existence, but I'm no longer on that board. So now I report to folks who are in different places on the org structure than I am. And I think anybody who you talk to on that board will tell you that is a lot of work, because it is. I mean, they are truly running the business. It's not window dressing. They have that same authority that a board would do in a traditional corporate structure.
The idea of employees or people within an organization having an ownership stake is a good one. And there's a lot of work that goes into owning and running a company. And I'm just wondering, has that impacted anything for the better or the worse in terms of sharing that responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, in some ways I have had the easiest transition, because all that has changed is, instead of reporting to, purely Jesse as the primary shareholder, I report to this board now. And, I'm still thinking about all the same things I was thinking about in March of 2023. It's just that I share them with a different audience. And I think that's been really beneficial for me as, sitting in the CEO seat, having a variety of perspectives, having folks who, may not have been thinking about this stuff for as long as I have. And one of the cliches is, you don't really understand a thing until you can explain it to somebody, and having to explain my thinking around why we have the ad policy we do, how we're thinking about show growth, all of that. I also get back from them a lot more than in terms of insight, perspective, even, people who we should consider working with that I otherwise I don't know that we would have the same channel for exchanging that information. So it really does function as a traditional board where they are both overseeing me and making sure I'm doing a good job, but they're also a resource for me if I have a problem, if I have a challenge, if I have just a question that I want to think through out loud with somebody. And that's invaluable.
So it sounds like you're having a really good experience, and the company is having a really good experience since this transition. Is there anything that you would say has been a negative since this happened?
I think the biggest thing is the work. And not so much the work for me, but the folks who have stepped into that board responsibility and the broader worker ownership, it's another thing on their plate. And for, our chair, KT Wigman, she has to prepare the agenda for board meetings, which are relatively frequent. When we have a general assembly, which we're doing every quarter for all the worker owners, our treasurer is not an accountant. She's not trained as an accountant. Stacy Molsky didn't go to accounting school. She has an art history degree. She's really smart and she can figure all this stuff out, but that is not stuff that she ever had formal training around. And so it has been inspiring to see them take up those roles, but it is more work. Even separate and apart from the board. Just being a worker owner is a responsibility, as you mentioned.
So let's take one step back, and could you provide the cliff notes as to like what has changed and like what a worker owner is entitled to and how that differs from like the former structure of the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think the former structure was basically Jesse and his wife who started the company, as is commonly the case. They owned the company and reported to them, and ultimately they were the authority over the company, and ultimately they were the ones who made big decisions. The financial benefits of the company ultimately went to their favor. As a change to that in a worker-owner construct, like the workers own the company, so everybody who wants to be a worker owner of the company buys into that. You're not actually buying like a percentage of the company, but you do it through payroll withdrawals, but you're saying, I'm going to sacrifice a certain amount of money so that I get this right to own a piece of the company.
As I understand it, it's a small amount of money, which is meant to be more symbolic than anything, saying that like this is intentional. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's supposed to be large enough so that you notice it, but not large enough so that you miss it or are feeling a pinch in other parts of your life as a result of it. And that's exactly right. It demonstrates sort of commitment to the cooperative because it's a serious responsibility, as we talked about. Following that, you vote on members of the board. You can stand for election for board membership yourself. And any major decision that we would make, we would also bring to that general assembly of worker owners. So if we were thinking about moving offices, that's something that the workers would weigh in on. Our annual budget is something that the workers see and weigh in on. So that there's the governance part of it that they enjoy, and then there's also the sort of financial or economic part of it, where if the company makes a lot of money in a given year and we have excess cash flow, we can collectively decide whether we want to distribute that cash flow amongst the workers, so profit share to all the worker owners, or if we want to reinvest that in the company, or if we want to put it aside for a rainy day fund.
Is this like an HOA? Is that a similar comp?
When we were first going on this sort of co-op journey, having spent a lot of my professional life before this in New York City, I was like, oh, co-ops, I understand that. Those are buildings. And I've never been a member of one, so I can't speak from experience. But I think there is a sense of like shared ownership and shared decision-making. From the co-op boards that I was familiar with in New York, I think they're a lot more political than our company is. But I don't know. It is a similar structure, I guess.
Interesting. I live in an HOA right now and also own a business. It's funny because I would just never put the two together in the same conversation. How many of your employees elected to buy into the worker owner program?
Yeah, at the time of conversion, we had 21 full-time employees and 20 of them elected to be a worker owner. And you need to be a full-time employee to be a worker owner under our structure.
I don't mean to single anyone out, but one of my questions was going to be like, why would you elect not to do this?
Yeah, I can maybe answer in the hypothetical. I also do not wish to single anybody out. I think there is the potential that some folks just are looking for a job and they don't want the added responsibility or complication of caring about what you need to care about as a business owner. So while I think there was a really strong argument for being a worker owner, and I think we made it really achievable, this might be doing a little bit of mental gymnastics, but in a way for me, it's a good sign that somebody elected not to do it because we wanted it to be a choice. We wanted it to be something that people were actively choosing as opposed to something that people just said, oh, well, of course I would do this. Why wouldn't I do this? Like, in a weird way, you don't want to stack the deck so much in favor of worker ownership because ultimately you are asking something of these people, and the people who participate, you want them to feel like they are invested and that they made an active choice.
We've talked about what happens if the business is going well and you're making a profit. You maybe have a rainy day fund or can do a distribution. If the business comes up short and you have to make tough decisions, that also, I assume, falls on the worker owners. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of my job as CEO is to give a true assessment of where the company is and what what I expect will happen. And fortunately, we have not been in the situation where we've had to make a tough decision. But, right now I've talked to people about, hey, the advertising world is still really volatile. So let's make sure we're managing our cash really carefully. And, let's make sure that we know what our reserves are, and let's make sure we know what happens and what our key milestones are throughout the year. Part of that cash distribution every year that would happen out of profits, part of that actually doesn't get distributed out to the workers. It actually goes into a set-aside fund within the organization. And the intention is to ultimately distribute that out to workers, but it also acts as sort of a fallback where if there's a shortfall in a given year and we can't cover it with cash reserves, we can also look at those individual capital accounts the same way that as a business owner, if you needed to recapitalize your business, you may have to do that from your own pocket. So, being a worker owner and being in a cooperative doesn't eliminate any of the risks of being a small business owner, which is what every one of our worker owners is. But it does socialize those risks a bit, and it makes sure that everybody who's invested in this process knows where they stand in relation to all of that.
If it comes to the point where you feel that some kind of staff reduction is the best, move for you all to make, is that something that gets voted on by the people who are being considered in that discussion?
This sort of gets into the governance versus management perspective on things. So I remain the CEO of the company, and so decisions around personnel continue to sit with me. And it's really incumbent on me to be able to explain those decisions to the organization. And ultimately, I am accountable. My job is the job that everybody would be able to vote on. In that circumstance, it would be my responsibility.
Even if it was another owner?
Yes.
Interesting. Are there other models in media that you think that are not co-ops that you think achieve similar results? I know that this is in a lot of ways kind of the extreme choice from I don't know, I'm making this up, a public company or something. But is there any middle ground, corporate structures that you'd like that you think are interesting?
I don't know if I'm talking from a deep well of experience or knowledge around that. There are other forms of worker ownership, like employee stock option programs and things like that. I think a lot of those serve to give employees some of the financial upside of worker ownership, but without the governance and control that a true cooperative model gives. And there is stuff that's more extreme than what we do. There are things that are more like collectives where every decision gets collectively made by the employees in the business, and potentially every decision has to have a supermajority or an absolute majority or a consensus around it. So there is stuff that is more on the side of total equality amongst everybody working in an organization. And we sort of sit somewhere in between that. But in a lot of ways, what we do is traditional corporate operations, while at the same time understanding who the ultimate stakeholder is. The ultimate stakeholder is the employee.
So yeah, now that you're 8 months into this, how's it been going?
It's been going really well. I think there was a purposeful intention operationally, internally, to keep things sort of chugging along the way they were previously. But I think the way the change has really been reflected has been in the folks who want to work with us and the number of new shows we've been able to launch as a co-op, where, frankly, working as a cooperative and having the structure that we have gives creators a lot more assurance that these people are ethical. These people treat their workers appropriately. Everybody here seems to get it.
You practice what you preach.
Yeah. We don't have the situation where a creator, has to publicly support a union drive that is being pushed down by the management of the organization where their show is. And I imagine that's a hugely uncomfortable position to be in. The other way that sort of factors into our relationships with shows, and this has always been the case, but I think it's much, it's underlined by this new structure, is what we care about is creative sustainability. We care about making sure that our jobs exist in the future, for sure, but we also understand that a lot of that is making sure that the shows that we partner with can exist in the future. And so we're not into short-term profit maximization. We're not into like jumping on the latest trend. And I think that really, especially in a very volatile market, which is what we're still dealing with now, I think that is distinctive, and I think it's really attractive for shows who, ultimately the people we work with just want to make something. They want to make something and they want to have people hear it. And so, we've brought onto the network shows like Black People of Paramore, Valley Heat, which, it was like a huge podcast, 2022 Time top 10 podcasts in the world. And we were able to bring them back. We brought on Soundheap. We just launched a show last week called Free with Ads about all the movies, good and bad, that you can watch free with ads on YouTube. And so I think part of it has been really exciting to see folks who want to work with us, and I think who care about the fact that like we are a co-op.
It is very inspiring to see because, I've been a fan of you all for a long time and have been aware of everything that you do. You also did this in a year that was marked kind of by a historically bad ad market. That said, I know that MaxFun has a few different revenue breakdowns that don't necessarily apply elsewhere. I can spit out numbers that I've read, but would you mind sharing like percentage-wise, like where your revenue breakdown lies?
Yeah, so MaxFun was founded in 2007. There really wasn't an ad market for podcasts, and that's the first year that Jesse was like, "Oh, I got to make money from this show that I do every week," and so we were founded based on a listener support model, an audience support model, and that has been the case since 2007, where once a year we ask all the folks who listen to our shows if they can give us $5 a month, $20 a month, $35 a month. Some folks give us $200 a month. And, the deal is basically the understanding that our shows can't exist without audience support. Typically about 60 to 70% of our revenue is coming from the audience. Maybe around 30 to 40% comes from advertising. And I think it's really great. I think it's really in keeping with, the way that we care about, or the way that we think about shows, where a show does not have to have 100,000 audience members to be sustainable under this model. It just has to matter to 5,000 people. Like, if you can get a show that matters to 5,000 people, and you manage your expenses appropriately, and you think about how you're going to make that show, you can make it work, and you can make it work for many, many years. And there are a lot of shows on the network that do that. There are also shows on the network that do make it work with 100,000 or more downloads, but it really focuses you in on what are people going to care about, what are people going to value. And for me, the primary thing that drives new show acquisition or new show development is, do I believe that somebody's going to care about this? And do I believe that enough people are going to care about it to make it financially sustainable? And if I can answer that question affirmatively, then I think we're in business.
How has the last year changed, like, how you do that? So you've mentioned a few times that there's been like a greater number of like net new shows that have come to the organization. I know that like in theory, people are joining because of like the structure that you've built and you guys are kind of walking the walk, but has anything changed in terms of how you would onboard a new show? Or is it still the exact same process that it was a few years ago?
What has changed really is if there's a new show where the organization is going to commit resources to it, that's something that I take to the board. Beyond that, I think like there's sort of this emotional change that happens within the organization where everybody's just more excited about what's happening broadly, and what we're doing. So that part is great too.
How has that changed in terms of like the morale of like the employees? And and on the other side of that, like, are there shows that have come to you all where you have not worked with them because of, employee reception?
Yes, I do think in general people have a sense that, we have a shared sense of success. So we know that, oh, if we launch this new show and it does really well, that is a collective achievement in a way that it didn't feel the same way prior to the changeover. To date, we have not had anybody come to us who, we wouldn't work with because of worker sentiment. I will say, there have been times in the past, before the changeover, where there were shows that we thought could be very successful because they were attached to, high-profile personalities, where there were aspects of the show that we didn't think aligned with our values, and so we did decline to work with them. So I don't think, that's part of the thing here, where the values of MaxFun are what has made it special for so many years, and to some degree, shifting to a worker ownership model was a way of making sure that we were able to preserve those values going forward as well.
And that makes a lot of sense. And just to put this in perspective, there were a few interviews with Jesse, one of the co-founders of the organization, who still works there as a worker owner, where he expressed that he didn't want to sell to a big organization because he didn't know if those values would be upheld. And this was a way to go about, relinquishing some of the responsibilities that he didn't want anymore.
Yeah, he has said that in public. It is also something he and I had discussed when he was talking about a transition from ownership, that there was a real risk, and unfortunately it's one that we've sort of seen play out, where some of the folks who were making acquisitions in 2020, 21, 22, they saw a way of making strategic acquisitions based on a strategy that wasn't fundamentally about content or wasn't fundamentally about shows. It was about other things. It was serving other needs. And I don't know if you could do that and also serve the values that we care about, because we care about creators first.
If you went back in time 1 year, is there anything that you would have done differently?
The main thing that we would have done differently, or I would have done differently, is around communication with worker owners about all the steps in the process ahead of time. And to some extent, it's just really hard to do that. It's hard to figure out what you don't know as you're going through the process for the first time. And I don't know that this caused any rupture or huge disruption within the organization. But I think there were times where, on July 1st, when everybody was magically a worker owner of the company, giving a clearer understanding of what that meant and what that would look like. To some extent, you can't explain, you just have to live into it. But communicating around that, I think, is something that probably I could have done better.
One additional question is, what advice would you have to other organizations who may be interested in exploring routes to provide more equity to employees, but maybe who don't want to go as far as MaxFun did?
I think the biggest thing, and this has always been how I sort of think about business, is think about what the objective is that you have and how that aligns with your business model and how that aligns with the step that you're going to take. So our objective is sustainable creativity. Our business model is audience support. And the step that we took to align all of those things is to become a cooperative, because that is something where we are expecting to have slow but steady growth. And, nobody's going to become a millionaire off of this, but we will all be happy and satisfied in our work. And we will all be able to sustain the creativity that we want to see in the world. Different people have different objectives. Different organizations have different objectives for what they want out of business. I think if you look at some of the other worker-owned cooperatives in media, like Defector and Aftermath, those are folks who just want to make a living writing stuff, doing the type of work that they've been doing, and no longer be subject to the vicissitudes of private equity and forces that are beyond their control. For me, it's really about interrogating what you want out of your professional life. And I think worker ownership can be a really excellent route to having sustainable financial growth and to having control over your destiny, or at least to the extent that any business owner has control over their destiny.
Fingers crossed for a great 2024 in podcasting and beyond. One final question, and we ask every guest this, but what are you excited about today in podcasting?
So much of what we have seen in the last few years is like the separation of the economic value of of podcasting from the creative and artistic value of podcasting. And those two things have diverged in a way that really feels like, oh, all of a sudden we were piling on this economic value, and in some cases losing sight of some of the creative value. But, nothing about the creative has gone away. Nothing about the impulse to creativity and the ability with the right tools and skills and time and labor to make something amazing. That has not gone away. It is a really democratizing art form, and I think that there is a potential for us to see the same DIY style that has characterized our work since 2004 bring to bear, new projects that reach as many, lives as we reach. Like sometimes I'm sort of overawed and thinking about all this stuff starting from some dude's college radio show. We got an email last week where it's somebody who was like suffering from a chronic health condition that makes it really difficult to sleep, and we have a podcast called Sleeping with Celebrities, and they just wanted to write in to say like, hey, this really helps me. It means a lot to me that you do this. And I still think that there's so much power in, what we do without being highfalutin about it. For me, what is exciting about that is putting a lot more focus on the little things that folks can do to make the world a better place through the work that they want to create and get out there.
Thanks again to Bikram for joining us. To learn more about Maximum Fun, you can go to MaximumFun.org, where they have tons of information about the co-op. You can find Bikram on LinkedIn and Twitter @chatbot. And as you're listening to this episode, MaxFun is currently running their member drive, the MaxFun Drive. I encourage you to check out MaximumFun.com/join, and I encourage you all to consider donating. For more podcast-related news, info, and takes, you can follow me on Twitter @JeffUmbro. Podcast Perspectives is a production of the Podglomerate. If you are looking for help producing, distributing, or monetizing your podcast, you can find us at thepodglomerate.com. Shoot us an email at listen@thepodglomerate.com or follow us on all social platforms @Podglomerate. This episode was produced by Chris Boniello and Henry Lavoie. And thank you to our marketing team, Joni Deutsch, Madison Richards, Morgan Swift, Annabella Penna, and Vanessa Ullman. And a special thanks to Dan Christo and Caitlin Bogucki. Thanks for listening, and I will catch you next week.